I built 40% of the company's revenue over 9 years, then got fired for underperforming by a man who never met a single client. By the time they realized what they'd really lost, it wasn't just me walking out the door, it was 12 million. Brian didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. Just stared down at the papers in front of him like this was routine. Like I hadn't spent nearly a decade dragging this company from obscurity into relevance. "We need hungrier talent who can meet higher targets," he said, pushing a stack of termination paperwork across the glass conference table. Not even a flinch. His voice was steady, his tie too perfect, his hands too clean. The kind of man who delivers bad news like it's just another line on the agenda, right between Q2 projections and order more sparkling water for the fridge. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch either. I just smiled, thanked him for the opportunity, and stood up. Because I already knew something he didn't. He thought he was ending something, but he'd just started it. "My name is Darren McCabe. I'm 46 years old, and up until 6 minutes ago, I was the senior account executive at Trevant Corp in Kansas City. 9 years in the same chair. 9 years building relationships one handshake at a time. I didn't sell dreams. I sold results. My accounts brought in nearly $12 million a year, close to 40% of the company's total revenue. Not with gimmicks or ad spend, just long weeks, red-eye flights, and the kind of trust you can't fake. Brian had been here 6 months, hired by the CEO to shake things up. He came in wearing a $2,000 suit and started throwing around buzzwords like disruption and synergy. But I never once saw him on a client call. Not once. He changed the commission structure after his 3rd week, slashed my earnings by 20%, even though my numbers held steady. I could see the writing on the wall, and it wasn't subtle. They moved my desk to the corner temporarily during renovations. Meeting invites stopped coming. My computer was mysteriously serviced while I was out at lunch yesterday. One cut at a time. Death in the quiet, polite way corporate America likes to do it. I packed up 9 years into a single cardboard box. A coffee mug my daughter painted when she was 6. A framed picture of the family at Yellowstone. And a folder of client contact info I always kept separate. Habit, not malice. A habit I'd be grateful for by the end of the week. Valerie from accounting saw me walking out. "Need help with that? You switching offices?" "Something like that," I said, forcing a smile. She looked genuinely surprised. That's how it is. They keep it so quiet that by the time you realize you're on the hit list, you're already out the door. I rode the elevator down next to Everett, the CEO. He didn't even look up from his phone. No idea what Brian had just done. No idea what it would cost them. But he'd find out. Soon. The air outside felt clearer, colder, sharper, like I'd finally stepped outside a dream I didn't realize was a cage. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I just felt awake. I set the box down on the kitchen counter like it weighed more than it did. Maybe it was the weight of what it represented. 9 years collapsed into cardboard and silence. A mug with chipped paint from a 2nd-grade art class. A photo from my daughter's graduation, the one I almost missed because a client needed a last-minute pitch deck. A folder, thick, weathered, full of names, numbers, and notes. All of it in my own shorthand. I never kept it to be slick or secretive, just prepared. A habit from the old days when you had to earn trust one phone call at a time. The house was quiet. Rebecca was out of town, staying with her sister in Denver, helping with a new baby. Probably for the best. I didn't need sympathy right now. I needed space. I poured a drink, 2 fingers of bourbon, the good kind, and stared at the box like it might suddenly make sense. 40%. That's how much of Trevant's revenue came from my clients. I hadn't thought about it like that before. It wasn't until Brian and his charts tried to quantify me that I saw the scale of what I'd built. Lockhart Manufacturing, the Henderson Group, Westfield Properties, Carlton Industries. I brought them all in, negotiated the contracts, extended the terms, maintained the relationships through recessions, mergers, and more than a few bad quarters. I was the reason they picked us. and the reason they stayed. I used to joke that I was married to my clients. Rebecca didn't always laugh. "Thursday dinner with the Johnsons again?" she'd ask. I'd shrug and promise to make it up to her. But promises don't show up to school plays or baseball games. And after a while, Dad's working became a full sentence in our house. I told myself it was worth it. And for a long time it was. 3 promotions, 2 office expansions, a business that grew from $4 million to $30 million under my watch. And yet today, all of that walked out the door in a box. Not with fanfare, not even a handshake from the CEO. Just a slow, polite exile. I picked up the folder and flipped through it. Notes in the margins. Cell phone numbers I wasn't supposed to have. Birthdays. Spouses' names. The kinds of things no CRM ever captures. Not because I was told to remember, but because I actually cared. Brian didn't just fire me. He severed the only real tether that tied Trevant to millions of dollars in business. And the funny thing is, he still didn't understand what he'd done. Not yet. Brian Ellsworth walked into Trevant like he already owned the place. 6 feet of boardroom confidence in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He shook hands with his eyes elsewhere, talked like he was narrating a TED Talk, and spent more time in the executive lounge than with the actual sales team. "We're going to scale smarter," he said during his first company-wide meeting. "It's time to evolve from legacy methods to aggressive growth strategies." I remember thinking, legacy methods? I was the legacy method. He never joined a call, not one, never shook hands with a client, never sat across a table when a renewal was on the line. But he had opinions, charts, PowerPoints, projections with bright colors and no context. And the CEO, Everett, nodded along like Brian was the second coming of Wall Street Jesus. 3 weeks in, Brian cut commissions. Said it was a realignment to incentivize hunters, not farmers. My take-home dropped 20% overnight, even though my numbers held steady. He said nothing to me directly, just sent a memo and smiled in the hallway like we were still on the same team. I saw what he was doing. It wasn't about performance. It was positioning, clearing the runway. Then came the office shuffle. My desk was moved to temporary space during renovations. Julia, my assistant of 4 years, reassigned to marketing. Expense reports came back with questions. Travel approvals needed executive sign-off. One nail at a time, they loosened the frame. Then the whispers started. Young faces in suits roaming the halls. New hires with MBAs and no client experience. One of them, Alicia Winters, 29, fresh from some SaaS startup, was assigned to shadow me on a call with my biggest client. No warning, no introduction, just a last-minute calendar invite and a smile. Travis noticed. After the meeting, he texted, "Who's the new girl? Are you training your replacement?" I laughed it off. Just growing the team. But inside, I felt it. That deep, unmistakable gut shift. The one you only get when the play's already in motion and you're the only one who didn't get the script. Brian wasn't here to lead sales. He was here to dismantle what I'd built, brick by brick, and replace it with something he could stamp his name on. He didn't need me out of the way because I failed. He needed me gone because I succeeded. And people like me made him irrelevant. It didn't hit all at once. That's the thing about betrayal. It's never a slap in the face. It's a slow tightening of the room, a quiet closing of doors you didn't even realize were open. It starts with a missed email, a meeting you were somehow not added to. Then it's your assistant getting reallocated, your desk moved under the pretense of renovations, and the hallway nods turning into forced smiles. Nothing loud, nothing you could point to and say, "There, that's the knife." But it was there, just under the surface, always humming. I remember sitting in that new corner desk, watching the reflection of the glass wall behind me. I could see Brian in the conference room, laughing with 2 of the new hires, suits that hadn't earned their shine yet. No scars, no stories, just pitch decks and bravado. They looked at me sometimes like I was a dinosaur, like the business had evolved past men who built relationships with time instead of tech. That's when I started noticing my name missing from client summaries. Internal memos circulated with data on strategic realignment, but no one asked me about the people behind those numbers. People who called me when things went sideways. People whose kids' names I knew. None of that made the slide deck. One day I walked into my office to find my desktop offline. It said they were updating software. I didn't argue. I just waited until they left and checked the network logs. Someone had been in my system, copying files, pulling call records. Nothing that belonged to me, technically. But still, they weren't updating. They were auditing. And I let it happen. That's what eats at you later. Not that they played you, but that you saw it coming and did nothing. Because a part of you still believed in loyalty, in legacy, in the idea that results mattered more than optics. But they should have known better. I wasn't just a cog. I was the flywheel, the bridge. The one who turned cold leads into warm handshakes and big contracts. You don't just quietly phase that out and expect the foundation to hold. I poured another drink that night and stood at the kitchen window. Kansas City lit up below like nothing had changed. But something had, and they were about to learn what it meant to cut the cord on the one man who kept the whole thing together without ever asking for credit. The text came in just as I pulled into the driveway. Travis Hicks. Dinner still on for Thursday? I'll be flying in around 6. I sat there with the engine idling, the glow of the screen lighting up the cabin like a spotlight. He didn't know. Of course he didn't. Nobody did. And for a second I didn't move, didn't respond, just stared at the words like they belonged to someone else's life. Travis wasn't just a client. He was the client. Lockhart Manufacturing had been mine for 6 years. I'd landed them back when they were switching vendors after a merger and needed someone who could handle the chaos. We'd built that contract from $300K to $1.7 million a year. No marketing campaign, no big discount. Just me, on planes, in boardrooms, at family barbecues. He once called me at midnight to ask if I'd walk away from a firm I'd spent 7 years with. I told him only if there was something worth walking toward. That conversation became the foundation of Trevant's biggest account. And now I was gone. Off the books. No press release, no email announcement. Just quietly deleted from the system like I never existed. But Travis still had my number. Still wanted to talk renewals over steak and bourbon. I walked inside, dropped my keys in the bowl, and set the phone down on the counter without responding. The bourbon burned a little more that night. I wasn't angry yet, but I was starting to feel something colder. Like the walls were shifting behind me and I hadn't noticed until now. Travis wasn't the only one in motion. Henderson Group's contract was up for review next month. Westfield's CFO had asked me to attend their Q3 planning meeting in 2 weeks. Carlton Industries had their annual golf retreat coming up. All of them reached out to me directly. Not the company. Me. And now, none of them knew. They were walking blind into meetings with Brian or Alicia or whoever the hell else he was grooming to take my place. They didn't even know they were losing me until it was already done. I picked up the phone again and stared at Travis's message. Still unread. Still glowing. I didn't answer that night. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what would happen once I did. The dominoes were lined up. I just had to decide when to tip the first one. I woke up before the sun and didn't bother making coffee. Just sat there in the stillness. The house too quiet. My mind too sharp. I'd slept like a man with nothing left to lose. And maybe that's exactly what I was. But when I opened my phone, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. The names were already in my head before I scrolled through the contacts. Travis Hicks, James Henderson, Peter Carlton. 3 men who trusted me with more than just contracts. They trusted me with the pulse of their business. They didn't need a show. They didn't need a breakdown of why. They just needed to hear it from me. I called Travis first. He answered on the second ring, upbeat. "You ready for Thursday night?" I didn't waste time. "I need you to hear something directly from me. As of yesterday, I'm no longer with Trevant." There was a pause. Not long, but deep. "What happened?" "I can't say much, but you'll probably get a call from Brian Ellsworth or Alicia Winters. Maybe both. They'll want to walk you through your renewal." The girl from the meeting? Yeah. She doesn't know our business. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He filled the silence himself. Okay, thanks for the heads up. Next was James Henderson. I gave him the same line. Just the facts. No bitterness, no agenda. He went quiet too, then asked who would be handling their account now. I gave the names. He said, "We'll talk internally." I knew what that meant. Peter Carlton didn't even ask for details. "Whatever you're doing next, Darren, let me know. We signed on because of you, not the logo." By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The whispers were already circulating. This industry doesn't wait. News travels faster than email when people actually care. At 2:08 p.m., Everett Stanton called. I let it go to voicemail. "Darren, this is Everett. We need to talk about your transition. Several clients are expressing concern. Please call me back as soon as possible." I didn't. Instead, I drove to a quiet little office near Union Station where Lawrence Finch had practiced employment law for 30 years. I'd once helped his daughter open a bakery. He owed me a favor. "They can't stop you from working," he said after reading my termination papers. "But they'll try to scare your clients from following you. Be ready for that." I nodded and slid my phone back into my pocket. I'd made 3 calls, just 3, and the storm had already started. By morning, it wasn't a ripple, it was a wave. Travis sent me a screenshot of his email to Travant's legal department. "Due to a change in relationship management, Lockhart Manufacturing is terminating its contract effective immediately. No drama, no elaboration, just gone." 2 hours later, James Henderson followed. Then Carlton. By lunch, I counted 8 terminated contracts. All mine, all major. And every single one had cited the same thing: loss of relationship continuity. At 1:12 p.m., my inbox lit up with a formal notice from Travant's legal team, a reminder of my continuing obligations and confidentiality clauses. Subtle threat. No bite. I forwarded it to Lawrence, who replied within 10 minutes. "They're bluffing. You're clear." At 2:47 p.m., Brian texted, "Let's talk about your exit package. There may be an opportunity for consulting work during this transition." I stared at the message for a while before locking the screen. They didn't understand yet. This wasn't a negotiation. The moment they slid that paper across the table, they'd lost leverage. And worse, they'd lost trust. At 5:30 p.m., Travis texted again. "Just got off a call with Brian and your CEO. They said Alicia would manage our account personally. Then they offered a 10% discount." I replied with one question. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it. Then I sent them our termination notice." He didn't even wait for me to respond. "Darren, where are you landing? Because wherever you go, that's where our business is going." That night, 3 more companies from my portfolio pulled the plug. No drama, no drawn-out decisions. They just followed the person they trusted. And the next morning, my old assistant Julia texted from a private number. "Complete chaos. Brian's trying to pin this on you. CEO's demanding answers. Board is furious. You should see his face." I didn't want to. By noon, Everett called again. I didn't answer. At 3:09 p.m., a number I didn't recognize rang through. "Darren McCabe?" the voice asked. "This is Michael Grantley. We've heard a few things, and several of our shared clients speak highly of you." I waited. "We'd like to make you an offer. Senior VP, full autonomy, executive committee seat, 6-figure signing bonus. We don't want your client list, we want you. When can you start?" There was no hesitation. "How's tomorrow?" I said. Brian thought he was replacing me with a younger model and a new pitch deck. But you can't fake trust. You can't rush relationships. And by the time they figured that out, the avalanche had already buried them. Julia called me the following week, her voice lower than usual, like she didn't want to be overheard. "You need to know what really happened," she said. I was sitting in my new corner office at Grantley, a bigger space than I ever had at Travant. I leaned back in the chair, closed my laptop, and listened. "It wasn't just Brian," she continued. The board's been planning to sell the company. Veritas Capital made an offer 2 months ago. Big money. But there were strings. I didn't say anything. I could feel the pieces starting to shift in my head, the outline of the real picture coming into focus. They want to consolidate all accounts under their own managers, she said. Standardize everything. Their system, their people. And they didn't like how many of our biggest clients were tied to one person. To me. They said it was a risk, she said quietly. That if you left, the clients would follow. She paused. Looks like they were right. I rubbed my face and stared out the window. Of course. Of course they wanted me out. I wasn't part of the packaging. I was the part they couldn't control. They needed to remove you before the acquisition, Julia said. That's why Brian was hired. Not to lead sales, just to slowly extract you from your own portfolio, so that by the time Veritas came in, everything would be transferable. And now? I asked. Veritas pulled their offer. Yesterday. Her voice dropped. They said the risk was too high without the client base you built. I didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, letting the silence speak. They hadn't fired me for underperforming. They hadn't even fired me for performance at all. They'd fired me for being irreplaceable, because in their minds, nobody should be that essential. They wanted clean numbers, predictable transitions, uniform account managers reading from identical scripts. But clients don't sign contracts with a company. They sign them with a person, someone who shows up, someone who listens, someone who's answered their calls on Sundays and remembered their kids' birthdays. And that was the problem. I wasn't a salesman to them. I was a liability. A living reminder that in a world obsessed with automation and scale, some things still run on trust. So they cut the cord. And in doing so, they unplugged the entire machine. It didn't feel like a job offer. It felt like a merger. When Michael Grantley called, he didn't waste time with small talk. He didn't ask for a resume or references or a list of achievements. He already had all that, through whispers, mutual clients, and the headlines quietly forming in industry inboxes. His tone was calm, measured, like a man who knew he was making the smartest move of his quarter. Senior Vice President, he said. Your own team. Full autonomy. No layers of approval. We trust you to manage your clients your way. Then came the number, a signing bonus that nearly equaled my last year's earnings at Trevant. And the final hook, a seat on the executive committee. What would you need from me? I asked. Just to keep doing what you've always done, he said. And do it here. That was the thing. They didn't want my accounts. They wanted me. My name. My relationships. The loyalty that no algorithm could replicate. It wasn't just an offer. It was a statement. Trevant had seen my connections as a threat. Grantley saw them as a moat. I accepted the offer that evening. Not out of revenge. Not to make a point. Just because it felt like the first time in years that someone actually understood my value and wasn't afraid of it. The next morning, I walked into my new office. Bigger windows, better view, fewer egos. No corner exile. No suits circling like vultures. Just people who were glad I was there. Julia texted me a photo that afternoon. Brian pacing in the break room. Everett in a closed-door meeting with the board, and Alicia being reassigned to an internal training role. It's unraveling, she wrote. Good. Trevant had spent months trying to untangle me from the relationships I built. They didn't realize those ties weren't stored in CRMs or backed up on company servers. They were in conversations, trust, history, things you can't transfer with a handshake and a new account manager. And now, the same clients they'd tried to reassign were already onboarding with Grantley. I hadn't pitched a single one. They called me. Because when you've shown up for someone in the moments that matter most, they don't care what logo's on the door. They just follow the person who never gave them a reason to doubt. And Trevant? They weren't losing contracts. They were watching their foundation walk out the front door, one call at a time. 4-0. The ballroom smelled like burnt coffee and polished ambition. Rows of navy suits and sleek dresses filled the chairs, each person pretending they weren't checking their phones under the table. I'd been to this conference 10 times, but this year was different. This year, I wasn't just attending, I was speaking. They introduced me with the usual platitudes. Veteran in the industry, proven leader in client strategy, now senior VP at Grantley & Company. What they didn't say was the part everyone in the room already knew. I was the guy who'd walked out of Trevant and took half their book of business with me. I didn't mention it either. No theatrics, no gloating, just the truth. I stepped up to the podium and clicked the first slide. Clean data. Side-by-side comparisons, response times, retention rates, renewal percentages, everything tracked from before and after the switch. In a world obsessed with automation, I began, personal accountability has become a luxury. But when clients feel like they're just another number, that's when they leave, even if it costs them more to do it. I kept it calm, precise, almost surgical. Just case studies. No names. But they knew. They all knew. I walked them through the numbers. Lockhart's onboarding time had dropped by 30%. Henderson's implementation costs had been slashed. Carlton's satisfaction scores jumped 22 points. The results weren't flashy. They were undeniable. The companies that treat relationship managers as interchangeable parts, I said, are always shocked when clients don't stick around. I didn't mention Brian, or Everett, or Trevant. But the message hit anyway. You could feel the shift in the room, people leaning forward, executives nudging assistants to jot something down, eyes darting toward board members across the aisle. During the Q&A, a younger guy, probably 2 years out of grad school, asked what everyone else was thinking. Isn't your move from Trevant to Grantley the kind of risk companies worry about when they consider how much autonomy to give their client managers? I nodded. Absolutely. But here's the thing. They didn't lose clients because I left. They lost them because they stopped listening. They stopped valuing what those clients cared about. I didn't take anything. I just answered the phone. Silence. Then pens scribbling. Heads nodding. When I stepped off stage, 3 people were already waiting to speak to me. 2 of them were from firms that had once tried to poach my clients. Now they just wanted to know how I kept them. Funny how fast the tone changes when results speak louder than strategy decks. 4-0. It's funny what changes in a year, and what doesn't. Same city, same skyline out the window, same rhythm to the work. Calls, emails, follow-ups, dinners. But everything else? Different. The kind of different you feel in your chest when you breathe deeper without realizing it. No tension, no politics, no second-guessing whether you're about to get blindsided in a meeting you weren't invited to. Grantley thrived. In 12 months, we'd grown 34%. My portfolio alone brought in just under $20 million. 11 of my former Trevant clients had signed long-term deals. Not because I begged, not because I sold them hard. They just came, one by one, quietly, with the same words every time. We trust you. And Trevant? Well, they were learning what happens when you cut the roots and expect the tree to keep standing. Their stock had dropped 20% in 6 months. Veritas pulled out of the acquisition completely. Too unstable, they said in a press release that read like an autopsy. Brian was gone. Pursuing other opportunities, according to LinkedIn. Alicia left not long after. Julia told me the remaining sales team was gutted, restructured, downsized, reassigned. No one really knew who was running what anymore. Everett stepped down last quarter. Citing personal reasons, the market made its call. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't personal. It was math. You can't fake 9 years of relationships. You can't plug a stranger into a trust someone else spent a decade building. You can't take a man's clients and expect the clients not to notice. And they did notice. They noticed when response times got slower, when questions took longer to answer, when contracts came with more fine print and less care. They saw the difference. They remembered who used to show up at their offices instead of just sending a Zoom link, who asked about their kids before asking about renewals, who picked up on a Saturday because they were having an issue no one else seemed to take seriously. That's the thing about trust. It's invisible until it's not there anymore. Grantley gave me equity, a seat at the table, Analysts, support, resources I'd begged for at Trevant but never got. They didn't just hire me, they invested in what I brought. And it paid off. Because the market always knows. It doesn't care about buzzwords. It doesn't care about who's in what office or who wears the sharpest suit. It just responds to results. And a year later, the numbers couldn't be clearer. I didn't need revenge. I had proof. I signed the partnership documents just after lunch. Black ink on thick paper, the kind that makes everything feel official even when you already know it's real. Full partner at Grantley & Company. 1 year to the day since Brian slid those termination papers across that conference table with rehearsed indifference. 1 year since I boxed up my office and walked out without raising my voice. And now, I owned a piece of something bigger, something built the right way. Rebecca walked into my office with 2 coffees and a smile. She looked around at the clean lines, the quiet hum of a company that ran on trust instead of fear. "Signed and official?" she asked. I nodded. "Signed and official." She sat across from me and studied my face. "You don't look as happy as I expected." "I am," I said, and I meant it. "Just thinking about what I'm building here, about doing it right this time." Earlier that morning, I'd approved hiring 3 new account managers, not just staff, partners, each with the same profit-sharing structure I'd negotiated for myself. No one would pour their life into this place only to be pushed aside when it got convenient. That was my first act as a partner. That was the line I drew. My phone buzzed. A message from Travis Hicks. "Heard about the partnership. Congrats. Knew you'd land on your feet." "Thanks to clients like you," I replied. "No," he texted back. "Thanks to you. We just followed the value." I stared at that message for a while before setting my phone down. On the credenza behind me sat the framed quote Rebecca gave me last Christmas. Simple parchment, black lettering. "The best revenge is massive success." I placed it face down. That part of the story was over. Later that afternoon, I booked a lunch with Everett Stanton. Not to gloat, not to rehash what happened, just to let go. Because the truth is, holding on to bitterness takes up space where better things could grow. On the way out, I stopped by reception to tell them I'd be gone early. Our son had a band performance that evening, something I'd have missed in my old life without even realizing it until it was over. But not this time. I drove out into the city I never left, but finally saw clearly. Some losses hurt, some burns leave marks, but some fires, they clear the way for everything that matters next.